of come back
I'm sure.
and look at things again and really dig into what worked and didn't work. Just as an example, I'll take the 4th of July. It's a busy day in the world of theme parks. Every 4th of July, there was a new planning conversation. It's not like the previous 4th of July didn't happen, and nothing changed about our world. The theme park was the same. The attendance expectations were similar, but we would go back to the drawing board and look at how we were going to work in the environment this time around, considering what worked and didn't work in the past, learn from those experiences, and improve every time. So it is a big machine, and it's amazing what they're able to do. And I think it continues to be that way because they do consistently reinvent, even at small levels and small processes, about how they handle crowd control in certain areas of the park. They're constantly looking at that so they can get better every time.
You also worked at education powerhouse Kaplan. And when we were talking before, I got this kind of theme from you that and you mentioned it earlier in this call, that you really spend a lot of your time thinking about what we might describe as frontline workers. I think in the context of Kaplan, it was people in call centers. And, I was just reflecting on when you look at the amount of money that L&D spend, which is considerable, a massive chunk of that goes on leadership training. Look around the floor at a conference, you'll probably see a third of the booths relate to kind of leadership. And yet you've chosen to focus a lot of your career on the doers, on the front line. What's behind that, and what have you learned from that?
Sure. So one, I consider frontline management an extension of the doers. I believe that we do a disservice to frontline management by treating them differently than we try to treat employees, especially as we try to evolve what we're doing in learning and development. I literally just published on an article on my LearnGeek website about the importance of frontline managers, to say that, in my experience, having been a frontline manager for a good chunk of my career, a lot of my development was a struggle. It was leaning on the people around me and figuring out what could I take from them and what were they good at and what were they maybe not so good at that I should avoid. Trying to get into structured training when it was available. One of my early manager roles, I had to go to classes on my days off because my boss just wouldn't schedule me for them. So the only way I could get at certain information that I couldn't learn on the job was in that way. I didn't have a lot of on-demand access to resources and proven practices and things like that. So for me, if we want to enable our frontline employees the best we can, we also have to enable the frontline management and do it in similar ways where people have the support they need, when they need it, where they need it, all the time, as opposed to having to go to a structured program in order to do it. And I think that mentality of mine started to grow out of Disney because, again, I was frontline management there. And then turning into learning and development, I designed programs both for the frontline cast as well as the management teams at various levels, and started to kind of see that connection. And then by the time I went into a contact center environment, the kind of role of the manager and the influence that they had over the kind of day-to-day experience of the employee became even more clear, given that the teams were, in Disney, one employee could have 12 or 15 different managers. But in this environment, it was a much more close-knit team structure where each employee had one specific manager, and I saw the differences in how they engage with their teams and then how they engage with learning and development, and realizing that I can't influence change down to the front line who's touching the customer if I don't engage that front layer of management. Because even if an executive team buys in and if middle management buys in, something happens by the time the message gets towards the front line where things start to shift. So we had to look at how we engaged management differently. And I don't believe the answer to that is quote unquote leadership training, because I've yet to hear a manager tell me that the world for them was forever changed because they went to a program. Or they flew to headquarters and they spent 2 weeks focusing on X, Y, and Z. I'm not saying that structured training is a bad thing for managers. I just think we get caught up in this idea of leadership training, and it gets very fluffy, and it starts to lose its connection to the day-to-day reality of being a manager and being held accountable to certain types of goals and managing priorities between the demands put on you by your organization, your team, and your customers. And I think we need a much more grounded approach to enabling managers, and leave the conversation of leadership on the side because we need to recognize that the strongest leaders in your organization probably don't have titles. Leadership is not something that is bestowed. It is something people earn, and it can occur throughout the entire organization at different levels. So I think leadership needs to be approached in a different way. That's not about learning and development as much.
I want to change gears a little bit now if I can. I know at least part of your role, JD, at Axonify might be described as evangelist. I don't know if you use that word, but that's sort of how I describe it. You know, working with customers, bringing the work of learning vendors to learning practitioners, and then creating the feedback loop that we talked about before. Often there's a bit of a firewall placed between the two communities. Sometimes vendors are kind of a little bit dirty, in air quotes there, at conferences and so on and so forth. They're sort of treated differently. And yet, clearly, we all have a lot of work to do collectively to move the discipline forward and have greater impact and help frontline managers and all our employees. Do you see that mindset at work?
Yes. And I mean, even again, rewind me to a time when I wasn't on the solution provider side of the fence. I didn't like vendors. I didn't like getting cold called for a variety of products I never looked for, and I didn't like having to pilot new things that I knew weren't really going to work for me. And the reality was that most of the vendors that I was playing with were what I would term on the bad actor side of the space. They were trying to sell me something, but they weren't meaningfully contributing to the work I was trying to do as a member of a larger professional community. And when I was looking to do something new and was talking to the Axonify team, first, I actually knew them because I was a client of theirs. So I got to know the team on the other side of the coin and was really starting to understand the type of people that I would be working with and having a different type of a relationship than I had with some of my other specifically learning technology vendors at the time. And when it came time to talk about an opportunity, they were actually concerned for me because I had already started doing some writing work and speaking, and I was already trying to kind of grow my ability to engage with the community beyond my 9-to-5 job. And the team at Axonify actually asked me if it would be okay for me to cross into this side of the world because it's known that there are sometimes challenges, and would my credibility take a hit because I was now working for a technology company and not within an organization where I was a practitioner doing the work every day. And I was fine with it because I saw something different in the team that I work with today, and I still see that. But what I do in my role with Axonify is I urge us at every step, regardless of what team we're talking about, to be contributors to a community first, right? We obviously still want to work with organizations. We want to sell, a technology product that we believe in, that we know works, and services that support that. But first, we have to contribute to the larger conversation and help people who do this type of work get better and understand where the potential are, what these words mean, what microlearning really is and what it can be, and make sure that people respect us as a member of a professional community and not someone who's just trying to sell things. And I run into some snags here and there because I am a vendor, where maybe I'm not allowed to play in certain areas because vendors have been problematic. Or I go to plenty of presentations and I'll sit here and listen to webinars while I'm doing different work tasks, and I'll hear a vendor trying to talk about a certain topic, but who did they send? They sent a salesperson or they sent a marketing person. They didn't send someone who really understands what it is like to be in this world, to do this type of work, and that can answer questions and kind of go to a depth that really helps L&D practitioners understand kind of where the value is and where the potential is. Because I think vendors are a critical part of this world, right? We have a luxury where we can focus on the bigger problems and driving certain conversations forward, trying to drive technology to a place where it becomes of more value. It's kind of looking at things through a different lens because I don't have stakeholders and subject matter experts clamoring at me that they need training on and throwing PowerPoint presentations at me and saying all of the words have to be on the slides, right? That day-to-day reality of being in L&D. I'm lucky to have I don't have that chasing me. So I can kind of look forward facing in a way that I think a lot of people wish they could, but they just don't have the luxury to do it all the time. So I think if vendors were to play in that type of a fashion, be part of the community, and there are several out there, so it's not everyone that I believe is a problem, but there's more bad actors in the space than I believe are people who are in this for the right reason, to drive the profession forward, to help employees get better, and then believing that they've got an interesting way to help do that when they partner with the right type of an organization. So that's kind of my perspective on it. I would love to engage in conversations with folks who are, whether you're a technology vendor, content provider, a consultant or an advisor of some type, analysts. I think we should be having more conversations amongst us, even if we maybe sometimes are competitive, to see how we can better contribute to the greater conversation.
Sounds good. And certainly the philosophy here at Learning Futures Group is vendors play an important part, academics play an important part, practitioners play an important part, and we're trying to facilitate that conversation. While we're on this, I don't think I asked you earlier, but tell me about Axonify. There are lots and lots of microlearning platforms on the market. Your earlier comments about that term notwithstanding, what's unique? Can you tell us about the Axonify approach?
Sure. I tend to speak to Axonify through kind of an example, which I think speaks to kind of the breadth and depth of what we're able to do beyond kind of the typical term microlearning. So the common example I use, because most people have been to a grocery store, is if you imagine a grocery store environment. And in a grocery store, it's very hard, kind of like we spoke to earlier, frontline employees, to get development opportunities to an associate on a regular basis, because once you clock in and you hit the store floor, you're gone, and you're doing your job, and maybe you have 2-3 shifts a week, and you're busy the entire time, and then you go home. And you obviously, because you're an hourly employee, you can't engage in structured training or anything like that when you're off the clock. So how do we provide people an opportunity to get better at the right things where they're struggling, or maybe they can learn to do new things because they maybe want to take on the next role? So in a common example, in a retail environment, maybe the associate comes in, they clock in for their shift, and then as part of their clock-in experience, they also log into Axonify. And in that a couple of minutes that they have, maybe 3 to 5 minutes before they have to hit the floor or get on a cash register, they experience a training and a practice opportunity that is unique and personalized to them. So when they log into Axonify, we will leverage as much data as made available about this employee. So everything from, what store they're in, what team they're on, what role they're in, maybe some data about, how their knowledge has been changing over time, because we're constantly measuring how people's knowledge is adjusting, maybe some behavior observation data about how they've been doing on the job in real life, maybe some performance, kind of business result data. So if it's a cashier, maybe we know what their scans per minute look like, maybe we know what their customer satisfaction scores look like, and we'll use all of this data and run it through machine learning to identify where there are potential gaps and where we should focus this time with the employee. So maybe we'll have some practice activity or ask them some questions about some scenarios to really drill certain pieces of information that are critical for their role. Or maybe today's it's compliance time because it's the anniversary of their hire date, so they have to do their compliance training. So we'll serve that up to them as well. So we serve up a variety of different types of learning opportunities. You can also pull information on demand in a searchable format if you're looking for some additional content or additional training. But we spend those couple of minutes with the associate. We leverage different game mechanics and motivators to bring people back consistently, which is why on average, we see about 75% of Axonify users come in at least once a week. On average, they come in 2 to 3 times per week to complete these brief experiences. And then every day, as you kind of spend 5 minutes a day focused on the right experience and the right topics, people incrementally learn, get better at the job. And then that's how we see amazing business results with the organizations we work with. So it's kind of the simplified experience.
Are there specific mechanics that drive that engagement and re-engagement level, or is it to do with the quality or the relevance of the content? How would you describe that?
The two big motivators that I think are most powerful are one, value add experience. So when you look at the way that we adapt and personalize training, it's clear when it's done correctly that every time that you log into Axonify, you're going to get something that's useful for you. It's not training for the sake of training anymore. And then two, there's choice. So most Axonify users are voluntary. They're almost never, and we urge organizations to not require. We want it to be something that people want to do as part of their day. And then in the experience, we'll leverage things like gameplay. There's a leaderboard component. There's points. There's a rewards and recognition system. But everything is optional, so you can choose what you want to engage in. And when I first got involved with Axonify and I saw the high levels of engagement, I would ask some users of the system, why were they coming in every day on their shift? And I got 10 different answers from 10 different people. They were all learning and getting better at their jobs, but they were doing it or their kind of reason for initially getting involved were at different levels, and that was just fine with me because they all kind of found their core value proposition, but they stay because the content and the experience is relevant